He Wouldn't Go to Sleep by Enid Blyton. Lipper the Frog was a fine fellow. He was 5 years old, so he was quite grown up and felt very proud of himself indeed. "I am the biggest frog in the ditch," he said to himself. "I have the brightest green coat, and I am sure that no other frog has legs as long as mine. I can leap almost to the top of the hedge." He couldn't really, but certainly he could jump very high for a frog. Once, when a rat was after him, Lipper jumped so high that the rat was afraid and ran away. Lipper was clever at catching flies too. He flicked out his tongue, which had a sticky tip, and caught hundreds of flies each summer. Once a sparrow saw him catching fly after fly and flew down beside him. "How do you catch flies so easily?" asked the sparrow. "I would like to take a lesson from you. I cannot catch nearly so many as you, and I have 4 baby sparrows to feed. Teach me how you do it, frog." "Well, it's quite easy," said Lipper. "Look, I fling my tongue like this, hit the fly, and bring it back into my mouth on the tip of my tongue." "Yes, but how do you manage to fling your tongue out so far?" asked the sparrow. "Mine will only go out a tiny way." "Ah, but I have my tongue fastened to the front of my mouth, not to the back," said Lipper proudly. "You see, I can put it out much farther then. Look!" He flung his tongue out again and hit the sparrow in the beak with it. "Good gracious!" said the sparrow in surprise. "Don't do that! I'm afraid, Lipper, that I'll never be able to catch as many flies as you, because my tongue is fastened to the back of my mouth, just as the tongues of children are." Well, you are very lucky, I think." Lipper had a lovely summer. It was rather rainy, and he liked that. His ditch was damp and cool. Flies buzzed everywhere, especially the big bluebottles. Lipper only had to sit under a dock leaf and wait for the flies to perch nearby. Then out would go his tongue, and fly after fly would disappear. Lipper grew fat. He found a great many green caterpillars and ate those too. He found a family of earwigs and had them for his dinner. He discovered where the slugs came out to feast after a rain shower, and he ate so many that he really couldn't manage even one more. Oh yes, Lipper had a marvelous time and enjoyed his life very much. He knew the mice that ran along the ditch. He often talked with the slow, wise old toad who lived under a big stone on the bank. He chatted to the sparrows and said, "How do you do?" to the hedgehog that sometimes came shuffling by at night. The summer passed, the autumn came, and acorns tumbled down in the wood. Blackberries grew fat and juicy on the hedges, and children came to pick them. The grass snake came wriggling along the bottom of the ditch, and Lipper got under a stone at once. The snake sometimes made a meal of a fat frog. "I can see you," called the snake. "But you needn't worry, I'm off to sleep the weeks away now." "Silly fellow," said Lipper as he watched the snake wriggling away. "Going off to sleep in a hollow tree whilst there is so much food to eat." It was a warm autumn. Flies still buzzed around, and Lipper had plenty to eat, but the nights were cold. The hedgehog came to say goodbye. "I have a cozy hole in the bank," he told Lipper. "I have taken dead leaves and moss into it in my mouth, and now I am going to curl up there, warm and snug, and sleep the winter away." "Silly creature," thought Lipper. "What is this idea of sleeping the winter away? I did it for 4 winters, but now that I am full grown, I shall do as I please. I shall spend the winter awake and eat all the flies there are. There will be no one to share them with, so I shall have more than ever." The dormouse hurried along the ditch, fat and brown. "Goodbye, Lipper," he cried. "I am fat and well, and I am going to curl myself up at the bottom of the hedgerow roots and go to sleep now that the winter is nearly here. Why don't you go to the pond as the other frogs do?" "Because I am not going to go to sleep this winter," said Lipper grandly. "It is a waste of time. I shall stay awake and eat everything by myself." "How foolish you are," said the Dormouse, and ran down a hole to its hiding place under the roots. It curled itself up, put its nose into its paws, and slept. The old toad called to Lipper. "Lipper, go to the pond and settle yourself in the mud at the bottom to sleep. It is time." "I'm not going to," said Lipper. "I'm going to keep awake for a change." "Why don't you keep awake too, old toad?" "I am wise enough to know what is good for me," said the toad, and he blinked sleepily. "Good night. I am going to sleep now. Do not wake me until the spring days are here." "Foolish toad," said Lipper, and he laughed croakily. "Nobody's brave enough to keep awake. Well, I will be the first frog to keep awake in the winter. How I shall laugh at all the other creatures when they awake thin and sleepy in the spring and see me here fat and jolly." One by one all the creatures disappeared. The bats went. The lizards were nowhere to be seen. The newts had gone. Every frog was at the bottom of the pond, sleeping tight. The toads were under damp stones. The dormice had gone, and the snakes no longer glided along the bottom of the ditch. Only the rabbits came out to play, and the stoats and whistles hunted them. And sometimes the big rat came slinking along the hedgerow to see what he could find. The frog hid then. At first there were many flies for him, and even a caterpillar or two. The flies came to feast on the ivy flowers that blossomed late on the hedge above. Lipper caught a great many. He liked the warm autumn sunshine, but at night the frost came and put a white covering on the grass. Then suddenly the flies all went. There was a very hard frost one night, and every fly was killed. Even the spiders now hid themselves away in cracks and corners. Not one was to be seen. Lipper grew thin. For 5 days he did not catch a single fly, nor did he find any grub or spider. He began to be worried. "Perhaps after all it is a wise thing to sleep in the winter," he thought. "I wish now that I had gone down to the bottom of the pond with the others. What am I going to do if no more flies come?" No more flies arrived. They were all dead. A whole week more went by, and now Lipper was so thin that he looked half his size. "I shall go to the pond and swim down to the mud," he thought at last. "The others will laugh at me, but I can't help it. I shall die of hunger and cold if I stay up here." So he began to leap away from the ditch towards the pond. He could not leap as high as usual because he was not so fat and strong, but at last he reached the pond. And then Lipper stared in astonishment. Something bad happened to the pond. It was no longer water. He could not slip into it and swim. It was hard like the earth. What could have happened? Lipper hopped onto the ice, for the pond had frozen, of course. But no matter how he tried, he could not get through the ice to the mud at the bottom of the pond. So he hopped off again and leaped to another pond he knew. But that was the same. It was quite hard and cold. "This is most extraordinary," said poor Lipper. "Why did nobody tell me that ponds went hard in the winter? I never knew that before, and I didn't know either that flies disappeared in the cold weather. Dear, dear, I thought I was so clever and wise and strong, and now I find that I know hardly anything. The ones I thought so foolish are the wise ones." He hopped away from the ponds. He was frightened, hungry, cold, and sad. He knew he would soon die, but it was his own fault. And then Billy, the spaniel dog, saw him. Billy was surprised. He was old enough to know that no frogs were about in the winter. He gently picked Lipper up in his mouth and trotted home with him. Billy had been taught not to hurt anything he picked up, so when he put Lipper down at the feet of his little mistress, the frog was not hurt at all. Nora, Billy's mistress, was most astonished to see the frog. "Mommy, Mommy," she called, "come and see what Billy has brought me. A frog in the middle of winter? Mommy was astonished too. She picked up the thin frog and looked at him. Poor thing, she said. He is half dead. Put him into your aquarium, Nora. Maybe he will sink to the bottom and sleep in the sand there. So Lipper was put into Nora's aquarium, and he was sensible enough to swim to the bottom and bury himself in the sand there. He slept at once, and there he still sleeps, for I saw him yesterday. Wasn't it a lucky thing for him that Billy the Spaniel found him? I don't think he will be quite so proud or quite so foolish next winter, do you? Hi, if you like this video, please give this a like and hit the subscribe button and click the bell icon to get notified whenever I release a new video.